Hello everybody, we are back with our deadline injury news. As you can see on screen, we have the FF Hub predicted lineups that Ben goes through every week with you guys and answers your questions too. I'm just going to quickly remind people as well, obviously we'll be going live today, but there can be developing injury news all across the weekend, so do head over to the Premier Injuries website as well and just hear the Premier League injuries table on our website. You can find out the injury news for every single team there. But yeah, before we start every live stream, I ask how you are, Ben. Is there an injury update on your life?
Pretty good as it stands, fingers crossed. For those who were involved in the North versus South game, they'll know that I picked up a fairly serious hamstring issue early on in that game. I'm still working my way back, believe it or not, but getting somewhere close to those pre-injury levels. So with regards to my own personal life, it's going in the right direction, mate.
Well, that's good to hear, mate, and that you're rehabbing. Any return to play timetable for that hamstring injury?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm questioning whether I'm too old and I'm maybe fooling myself into believing that the mind wants to do it, but the body maybe just can't cope with the demands anymore. So I'm not going to say I'm going to call it end to anything, but I couldn't be doing with another 2 to 3 months out of action, like I have done on the back of a charity fundraising game, as much as I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, let's go into the injury news of the Premier League. And just before we start, Cheekster says, "Let's go, Ben and Jason. Lovely to see you, Cheekster." Santosh has said, "Haaland captaincy as an option." Now, we're going to break the usual script here, Ben. You think that it's actually really important to start with the Haaland news. So yeah, let's go into that, and then we will go back to our usual alphabetical from Bournemouth all the way down through the Premier League. So yeah, let us know, Ben. What is the Haaland update?
Yeah, well, look, I want to give a bit of context just in case anybody in the world of fantasy football has been living under a rock for the last few days and hadn't heard that the Erling Haaland was potentially a doubt for this game. We've all been waiting with bated breath in terms of the Manchester City press conference and what Pep Guardiola would actually tell us. And of course, we're always after that definitive answer. Yes, he's fit. No, he isn't. And in response to that latest update, I've seen a lot of maybe anger directed towards the City boss in terms of what he did or didn't necessarily say. So Haaland picked up, there were three things really midweek with regards to Haaland in terms of his enforced withdrawal, shall we say, in Dortmund. One, Pep said he looked as if he was struggling with a little bit of fatigue. That could have been a combination of a couple of things. Again, adapting to the rigours of the Premier League. We forget he's a new arrival into this country, and that takes a little bit of time. And secondly, he also had a little bit of fever, so he was a little bit under the weather. And then thirdly, he picked up a knock on his foot. Now, it's the injury that's been the biggest concern because we have seen Erling Haaland and also Jean Cantrello with the City squad since that Dortmund game. They haven't been in isolation. So in terms of concerns about the mixing with the group and spreading any virus, any illness, look, that isn't really an issue. So that's fine. It's the foot problem that is the worry at this moment in time. Now, we've seen Erling Haaland actually limping quite heavily. He was wearing flip-flops going into the City training ground, didn't look comfortable. Now, I took two things from that. First and foremost, he wasn't wearing crutches and he didn't have a protective cast. So that suggests that really we're talking about an injury which is not too severe. And this weekend was always going to be about pain management. Now, the difficulty with this type of injury and the types of boots that players are wearing these days, there isn't any facility or room or leeway to maybe put any cushioning or any kind of protective padding in and around that foot. So, like I say, it would be a case of that pain management. Now, we were expecting, or FPL managers were hoping that Pep would say, like I say, yes, Erling Haaland is going to be fit or not. His response when asked the question was, we have one final session and we will make that judgment there, but he is feeling a lot better. Now, obviously, there are a lot of unhappy people at that kind of response, but Pep Guardiola is not telling us anything that we didn't really expect, because if he comes out and he says, yes, Erling Haaland is 100% fit, and then he picks up an injury or he suffers a reaction during that final session, there'll be a lot of unhappy FPL managers come deadline tomorrow if he was to miss out. If he was to rule him out, well, that's certainly, again, that's not going to be the case, because if he comes through that session unscathed, without any kind of reaction, then 100% he's in. Even if Erling Haaland does come through this session, which will be a late session, it'll not be full-blooded, but if he comes through without any problems, even then, we cannot categorically state that he will be okay, because sometimes the problems evolve. There may be something overnight. What I would say at this moment in time, because it looks as if it's just an impact injury, like I say, there's no cast there, it looks as if it's just going to be a little bit of pain management, then as it currently stands, unless that problem exacerbated and that training session, I'll be very confident of Erling Haaland being involved. Would I captain him? Would I triple captain him this weekend? I'm leaning towards Salah for my captaincy, but the Erling Haaland, I know. The issues that I have is if he's coming through that game, into the game, there is still the injury and the fatigue issue to go. So, if City are getting themselves in a good position, 2-3 up, Pep's going to be pulling them off and protecting him anyway. So is he going to go past that 60-minute mark? Possibly not. And for that reason alone, I'm looking at Mo Salah for my captaincy.
Interesting information there. So really, do you expect with this type of injury that this game week he'll be handled conservatively, but next game week probably be back to the usual meta of Captain Haaland, set and forget?
Look, you never know how these things can evolve. Point in case, look, we'll pick Alexander Mitrovic. Picked up that problem playing for Serbia international. Played the first game, forced off. Played against Norway, I think it was. Scored, forced off again. Wanted to line up against his former club, Newcastle. Forced off after around about that 27th, 28th minute mark. And then was sidelined again. And by his own admission, he's still managing that ongoing foot problem. So he's not 100%. But when you look at that Fulham team, he's a high profile, high status player. That's why he's still getting the minutes. If you look at Pep Guardiola and his City squad, if you pull Erling Haaland out, yes, he's a huge miss. But have they played without, a recognised striker before? Of course they have. Who could drop in there? Potentially. Kevin De Bruyne is a false nine. Phil Foden. Even Bernardo Silva, I think, has had a spell as a false nine role. So, look, there's a lot more strength and depth within that City squad. And that, there's no need to take any unnecessary risks with Erling Haaland at this point.
I think this is something that we discuss with Raj as well. We sometimes have him on and he talks all the time about risk and reward. And the difference probably with Haaland through this season, he will probably be well handled. We can expect him most of the time, but he will be managed conservatively just because they have that capacity within the squad. You can expect him to drop out every so often when there's the slightest question mark. They don't need to risk him, which is one of those factors. But do you think you've covered enough there on Haaland? I mean, we will go through the Man City team in a second. Do you want to get on to Bournemouth, Ben?
Yeah, and we move, Jason. Let's go.
We move indeed. So yeah, as mentioned there, the Cherries. What's the kind of team news there, Ben?
Yeah, well, we will be forced into at least one change. That's because Neto, the goalkeeper, suffered a hamstring problem against West Ham on Monday night. That looks to be fairly severe. So I wouldn't expect him to return before that break, before the World Cup. So Travers gets a second chance of proving himself this season. The other major question mark within that Cherries lineup is with regards to that centre-forward role. Dominic Solanke picked up what we thought at the time was quite a serious ankle problem. Now, Gary O'Neill said it's not as severe as initially thought. I do have Kiefer Moore leading the Cherries line at this moment in time. And that's because any decision with regards to Solanke, and there are no guarantees, will be made again after the final session. So, if you're thinking about should we go with Solanke or not? Like I say, it's questionable, and this could be one that I would tweak. Not expecting too many changes in that Bournemouth lineup. They did go on that six-match unbeaten run. Unfortunately, suffered back-to-back defeats now. However, like I say, I don't expect wholesale changes from Gary O'Neill because the players have performed so well since he took charge after that 9-0 drubbing at Anfield.
Guess what, Ben? Apparently we've mispronounced Haaland as well. Apparently it's Haaland.
Haaland. I'm sticking with Haaland. Look, I've had me Kuvaleski, Kubalali. I'm not adding Haaland to the list. Surely Haaland. I'm in the majority there. I'm sure I am. Haaland.
Let's
Haaland.
move.
Haaland. Erling Haaland.
We're just going to come up with more outrageous ways to say it. That's the only answer to it. Let's move it on to Arsenal, though. And what I will say as an Arsenal fan, and also looking at some of the statistics, the Gunners have been kind of leggy recently. I don't know from your opinion, Ben, but maybe the games have caught up with them. They look a bit tired. They're not as pressing as much. That tenacity is not there in the side, and it's reflected in their data as well. They don't do as well away from home, so the last two games have been away matches, and there's about a 1 XG difference per 90 between the attack at home versus defence. But in terms of it, it's interesting to me that there has been this drop-off, and maybe we shall see how they cope into the World Cup. But is there any kind of reason from injury-wise why the team have had a bit of a downfall?
Yeah, I mean, players are playing a lot of minutes, so fatigue potentially is a factor. We have seen Mikel Arteta rotate fairly heavily in and around Europe, so that's not massive. Although, like I say, we do see some of the mainstays remain a part of that. Although last night on Thursday, Bukayo Saka was not one of those in that starting 11. But you have Tomiyasu. He's returning off a fairly decent spell on the sidelines. He's been involved heavily. We've seen Ben White, in and around that sort of 70 to 75 minute mark, coming off fairly often. Who else we got? Erdegaard's had injuries, carrying little knocks. But generally, like I say, the squad, Gabriel Jesus. Now I spoke to a doctor with regards to concussive episodes and head injuries in particular, and it was noticeable. I was just looking at some data the other day, and I looked back at Gabriel Jesus being one of the most transferred players out of this round, and I was wondering why. Maybe faith in the Brazilian was on the wane. And you look at that head injury that he suffered a few game weeks back, and he hasn't quite been the same player since. When I was talking to this expert with regards to head injuries, what you said was if you have a concussive episode or a head injury, what you don't realize is it can actually impact on performance for potentially for several months, depending on the severity of that. Now, obviously, I know it wasn't a time loss injury, certainly with regards to the Premier League, but the impact of that may still be felt, and that's potentially or possibly why we might just see a slight downturn in Gabriel Jesus's output.
Amazing insight there, and it's something that I've definitely seen as an Arsenal fan. There has been a downturn in output, but it's not just Jesus, it's all of the team. There just seems to be something a little bit lacking. One question I do have with Tomiyasu / Tierney is Tierney out because do you think he's being conservatively managed from his injury that we saw in the summer? That was it a ligament one?
Yeah, look, there's been that many with Kieran Tierney over his short time at Arsenal. It's difficult to keep track, but yeah, that was a problem that he picked up playing for Scotland. That was a meniscus problem that had surgery. So yeah, he's coming back into it, and given his problems historically, that's why he's being managed. It was maybe a little bit of a surprise to see Tomiyasu switch across to the left-hand side in the absence of Zinchenko. I always thought Tini would have been nailed down in there, but for the moment, it looks as if Tomiyasu has that place nailed down. One question mark with regards to a potential start in this backline, and we haven't had anything official from Mikel Arteta or the club, and that relates to Gabriel. Now, it looked as if he limped down the tunnel on the final whistle in Eindhoven on Thursday night. And like I say, that might have been an injury-related problem, but we have to wait and see. It's very soon, obviously, after that game, the quick turnaround. So, we may not get a better understanding if there is anything to be concerned about until after the FPL deadline.
Well, that's one to keep an eye on then, Ben. But we're going to move over to Aston Villa. New management, Unai Emery. Has it been hard to predict the 11 for this game week?
Not hard in terms of looking at the personnel, because following their biggest win of the season and a fantastic result last weekend, and despite the return of Lucas Digne, who's recovering from that heel issue, I've actually left the villains as being unchanged. I think it would be a more difficult decision to expect to change any of that starting 11, like I say, on the back of that result, which was fantastic.
And, looking at the team as well, with Aston Villa, I'm excited because, as an Arsenal fan as well, I know he didn't end well, Unai Emery, but he's a clever manager. I think he will suit Aston Villa a bit more than Arsenal because of maybe the philosophy of Unai Emery. He's kind of the negative manager. He likes being the small fry. He likes being the unpredictable, and he's very pragmatic. So he changes game to game as well, which may again make it hard to predict through the season. Will he play 4 at the back? Will he play 5? Will he go defensive? Will he go attacking? And I think this sort of situation may suit him down to the ground because he will tactically adapt, and he's got a fairly good team there at Aston Villa as well. I think Gerrard should have done better with this team, frankly. But let's move from Villa to Brentford. We pretty much say this every week. It's more like an Ivan Toney update. He's the real one, apart from David Raya. Anything to do with that?
Yeah, no massive changes in the Brentford camp. Christian Norgard is on the cusp of a return. That's been an Achilles tendonitis overloading issue that's been managing since the end of August. Probably going to be too soon for him. Also, Lewis Potter could return to the matchday squad. He was omitted last weekend due to concerns. I wouldn't say fitness concerns, more of a lack of sharpness. And again, that's probably coming off the back of his ankle problem. But elsewhere, it's pretty much as you were for the Bees.
Up next is Brighton, and they're a team with a new manager as well. And I think this has seen another tactical change here, Ben. You've gone with 2 up top, but then maybe a kind of classic deep 4-4-2.
Yeah, I know we've seen with 3 at the back inherently, but it looks as if Joel Veltman is out of the equation with a calf problem. Not 100%, but certainly classed as a major doubt. Now, my initial thoughts were to bring Tariq Lamptey in there, and the worry or concerns that I would have is, can Lamptey play in a back 3? Maybe not, so therefore, adopt a more of a flat back 4. However, we've just had that press conference as well from Roberto De Zerba, and Tariq Lamptey is also a slight injury concern. So this is one that we may need to tweak because we've come live on air. I haven't had a chance to follow that up and find out exactly what's going on. Adam Lallana, he was in a forced withdrawal last weekend, but that was more fatigue related, again, coming off the back of an injury. So he's absolutely fine. So there are some changes that we can make within this Brighton team. I'll just, like I say, have to clarify 1 or 2 issues with regards to availability.
Nice. And just as we always remind people, do head over to the Premier Injuries website, or you can find the FF Hub predicted 11 as well. Now, this is a really exciting one with Chelsea this game week, but I think one of the reasons why I'm sticking off the Chelsea assets for a while is because of this conundrum that we have. Potter loves, I think he puts Pep to shame with his regular changes in the 11, and we've got another changed 11 here. We've got Brozier up front. I mean, Ben, what is your kind of thinking here?
Yeah, Pep Potter is the conundrum, the nightmare, everything that is. And yeah, I dare say I have took a little bit of a punt here, given words from Graham Potter in terms of managing Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang's load and minutes. He's still working his way back up to full fitness, and also just hasn't been very good, if the truth be known. And I think Broadshire, you're bringing him back, you're stopping him going out on loan. I think he deserves a place within that team. Havertz, he got himself a goal midweek. And I do like the two up top. So, with Mount sitting in behind there, unfortunately, there's no place in this lineup for Conor Gallagher. We've just come off the Potter press conference. I'll do a little bit more investigating and to see what he said, because this team was initially drafted on Wednesday. So like I say, it doesn't have all of the very, very latest news from the boss. We do know that Matej Kovacic was forced off with a calf problem. I had omitted him anyway because there's issues with that knee, which are ongoing, and therefore he struggles to play games in quick succession. So that's why he was out of the starting 11. But, ultimately he is fit and available if needed by Graham Potter.
So just bring it back to Brighton. Alfred has asked Karu Mitoma from Brighton, is there any updates on his situation?
Yeah, he has been training with the first team squad. So in essence, he is fit and available. A little bit unfortunate that he picked up that ankle problem, I believe it was, a few weeks back, because I did expect him to come into that starting 11. Now, unfortunately, because he's missed the last couple of weeks and he's only had a couple of sessions, probably the game comes a little bit too soon. So that's why I don't have him in that start 11. But he does lend himself more to a 4-4-2, the flat back four, as opposed to Estopian. I've absolutely butchered that one as well. I know I have.
Don't worry.
Yeah. So, whereas Estopian maybe, prefers to play in a more advanced role where he's got those attacking responsibilities, as opposed to maybe coming back the other end in a 3-5-2.
We've got another question, not on Brighton, on Chelsea. Giandre Bottes wants to know about Reece James.
Yeah, Reece James, unfortunately, we're not expecting him to play any football before the World Cup for Chelsea. There is still hope that he will be okay for England. But of course, the decision will then have to be made by Gareth Southgate on whether he decides to pick the player purely on the fact that he's going to be severely lacking that sharpness, that fitness, and you're on the world's biggest stage. So, that's the conundrum that the England boss has. But in terms of his availability, yes, all being well and without any reaction or major setbacks, he should be sort of in and around that recovery, maybe by, like I say, mid-November-ish. So like I say, it's a decision for the England boss to make a call on him. But as it currently stands, I think maybe Kieran Trippier is probably in pole position for that right back spot.
We've been told how to say Estupian as well. It is S2 Nian.
Estupinian.
I mean, this is partly.
What's his first name? Just give us a first name.
I don't know.
Ivor Estupian.
There you go. Just call him Ivor.
I just call him Ivor. And that's not his name either, by the way. I've got no idea what his name is.
Did you just make that up?
I just made Ivor up.
Ivor.
Ivor Estupian.
This is part injury news, part comedy duo at the moment. Let's move it to Crystal Palace. One player that I have, so much love for, Wilfried Zaha. He's playing really well, but the team at times has looked quite good too. Let's kind of discuss the injury news there. I've lost my cool now, just laughing about Estupian. What is the Crystal Palace injury news?
No major changes in the Palace camp, certainly no fresh injury concerns. Patrick Vieira will want to get back to winning ways, bounce back after a very disappointing result against Everton. There's one change that I definitely foresee. That would be the return of Doucouré into that midfield, just helps solidify that. Do think with the game being at Selhurst Park, Michael Olise gets the nod. Vieira talked about, Palace taking their chances and scoring more goals. I think he brings that. And that's why also I think Edouard, for this moment, looks locked in that central striking role.
All right, so we'll move from the Eagles to the Toffees. And Calvert-Lewin is keeping his place in the starting 11. He looked really good last weekend, didn't he, Ben?
Looked sharp, yeah. And I did question whether Frank Lampard maybe should have involved him. Again, after games in quick succession, the Toffees came up to St James's Park and he looked okay, especially when you've got Neil Maupay on the bench, but he went out and he got his goal against Crystal Palace. I've actually brought him in this week as well because he's a player that, quite rightly sort of believes that, there's still a place in that England squad for him. And when you have somebody with the intrinsic motivation and the appetite to go out and perform over these next couple of game weeks, we hear a lot of talk or suggestion that players will maybe want to down tools because they don't want to pick up an injury before the World Cup. Dominic Calvert-Lewin is the opposite end of that spectrum because he's got nothing to lose. If he was to pick up an injury, you've got 6 or 7 weeks, to recover for the second half of the season. If he plays really well and he goes all out, who's to say that he won't force his way into the thinking? Like I say, if he keeps on scoring those goals. For me, there's a lot of talk about Ivan Toney, maybe Tammy Abraham, but for me, I think maybe Callum Wilson and just probably edges it at the moment, but I am a fan of Dominic Calvert-Lewin as well.
Well, looking at the fixtures as well, Fulham, Leicester and Bournemouth for the 3 games before the World Cup for the Toffees. It couldn't be a nicer run, really, if you could imagine one. It's really nice. We've been told that Estupiñán's name is Purvis. It's not Ivan.
That's what I said. That must have got lost on the mic on the pickup. That
internet cut out.
Purvis.
Yeah, but Purvis, Ivan, they sound very similar. John Dre has asked, Patterson is back. Should he get minutes off the bench?
Minutes off the bench, always difficult when you're talking about maybe defenders, particularly as Seamus Coleman has been doing such a fantastic job in terms of his own form and fitness. Frank Lampard said he probably reached his peak against Crystal Palace, so that's why Seamus Coleman I have starting. Patterson, look, yeah, you might get a 10 or 15 minute cameo, but again, that comes down to how the team are performing and, the score at that particular point, and if there's been sort of any problems or enforced changes elsewhere.
Turning attention to Fulham, Mitrovic, is his ankle injury now thing of the past, nothing to worry about?
Nothing more to worry about. It still is a slight concern, but like I say, he's a bit of a warrior, isn't he, Mitrovic? So I'm not expecting that to affect him in any way, shape or form. Fulham have been in great form. The only real change to their matchday squad could be the return of Kenny Tete, but I'm sticking with that same 11. On recent performances, fully deserved. Marco Silva's doing a great job, and a big surprise considering I had worries, during pre-season.
And we are going to switch attention to Leeds United, and still no Rodrigo in the team, Ben.
Yeah, he's actually picked up an injury, so there's one of several injury concerns for Leeds this weekend. Tyler Adams, he was a player I was hoping to come back to maybe sit in that defensive role, but I think there's major question marks over him. Jess Marsh will definitely make late calls on Luis Sinisterra, Liam Cooper, Joel Kelhart, and Rodrigo within that. They haven't trained fully this week up until this point. So that's why I've thrown Patrick Bamford back into that start 11. But literally, if everybody was to be past fit, then there could be some major changes within this Leeds lineup. It's difficult. They're under pressure. It's a very, very tough fixture against Anfield. And spoiler alert, when I spoke about Mo Salah being my captain this week, I may even very, very tempted to use the triple captainship.
Ooh, that is huge news. I didn't even know this, but Ben did not prepare me of that. I'm going to have a sit down. But in terms of it then, do you think this is the make or break game for Leeds? Maybe not a result, but a better performance, because they've been without a win for a long time now. Is it since game week 8 only 1 point?
Yeah, look, I am. Yes, last 6 games weeks I've only had the bottom of the form table, and maybe results haven't been necessarily reflective of performances, or certainly in periods of games where they have dominated. I'm thinking the Arsenal game is one where they probably deserved a little bit more. Patrick Bamford missed a penalty, if I've got that right. So, like I say, 1 point is a little bit disappointing. But Jess Marsh needs his players to start delivering on his behalf and get those results because, like I say, the pressure is mounting. And once that crowd starts to turn, then you're fighting a losing battle and your days are numbered. So, the only way to appease those supporters is by getting points on the board. And if they were to go to Liverpool and Anfield and get a result, it would certainly do that.
Yeah, and part of the problem is sometimes Meslier as well. He's not preventing enough goals this season. He has the second worst XG prevented of all goalkeepers through the whole season. And, as well as you defend, if your goalkeeper's letting in shots that he shouldn't, then really it makes the whole thing even more difficult. We're moving it on to the Foxes, though. Another leaky goalkeeper there with Ward. But, yeah, what is the injury situation there? No Jamie Vardy up top. It's Patson Daka.
Yeah, look, there's only real two places up for grabs, in my opinion. Following last weekend's again, great result. Was it Molineux Wolves 4-0? Patson Daka or Jamie Vardy? It's a bit of a coin toss. I know that Jamie Vardy does love a game against Manchester City, and maybe if you're expecting the Foxes to sit a little bit deeper, maybe go with a 5-4-1. Then Jamie Vardy's the guy that you want maybe to break through those lines on the counter. I've went with Patson Daka. I will have a little bit of a think on that. The only other position that I see is maybe, Daniel Amati. And that comes about, if Johnny Evans can be past fit. But he has missed the last few with a calf injury. So that's why I've got Amati in there. And again, Brendan Rodgers wasn't able to give any assurances over the Irish centre-back. So pretty much stick with the same lineup from last weekend.
Yeah, so we're going to move from Leicester to Liverpool. We had a question about Firmino starting, and you do have him in your starting 11.
Liverpool are turning into a nightmare to predict as well. Jurgen Klopp did reference the fact that he may have to change his setup from midweek to cater for those, players in terms of availability, but also the likes of maybe Darwin Núñez, who's just coming back off that hamstring issue. So this is a team as I've got it standing, but again, this is one that I may look to tweak. Jordan Henderson, question marks over his fitness. Nothing too serious. It was a knee-on-knee action, so very painful, heavy bruising, received treatment yesterday, hasn't trained fully. So again, that may just bring about the possibility of Thiago Alcantara, who has been past fit following an ear infection, into that team. Or you could maybe drop Harvey Elliott in a little bit deeper. That's happened. Carvalho is another player who could come in on the left. So if you do access, the Fantasy Hub predicted lineup article, like I say, this is one that you may want to check later. I do have Firmino there now, but, whether it's alongside Salah, Núñez, Elliott, I don't know at this moment of game. It was a 1:30 Jurgen Klopp press conference, so we haven't had a chance to tweak or go through everything since this live stream.
So we have covered a little bit of Manchester City with Erling Haaland. Maybe just quickly repeat those things, but then we're going to have to talk about Cancelo. A lot of interest in whether he's going to play after potential illness there, and any other injury news.
Yeah, I'm not going too much into Haaland, but he is somebody that I do expect to feature, probably start, but he will be managed fatigue and injury issues. It's going to be more of a pain management problem. The only issues that I can potentially foresee would be during training a day if there's another knock or reaction. With regards to Cancelo, he was replaced midweek because of fever, but he has been pictured with the group, so he's not isolating. He isn't forced away from the squad, so that almost makes any issues with regards to that forgotten about. The only John Stones returned and Dortmund came through that game, but off the back of his injury problems this season, I don't expect him to start in back-to-back games. Calvin Phillips and Kyle Walker are both ruled out, although Phillips is progressing really nicely, and I'm sure he'll still feel that he can still force his way into that England squad, although unlikely in my opinion.
Now, DeAndre and Alfred have also reflected my feelings. There's no Phil Foden in the team.
Yes. Do you know what? Look, it's a difficult one. I do hate the was it Phil Foden dropped out of the starting 11 again last weekend? It's frustrating. It's because we have this such a array of quality and strength and depth within this City lineup. I hate picking the City lineup. I really, really do, because the big hitters like Phil Foden in there. Maybe the qualification in the Champions League may have me reflect on that start 11, because that sort of eases the pressure on Pep in terms of that starting 11, for next week. So maybe if he's going to cut his cloth accordingly and focus on the Premier League, then again, I'll look to bring Phil Foden in there. This is certainly not one of those starting 11s, again, which has been locked in. We only heard from Pep at 1:30. So this came just prior to that Champions League fixture midweek.
I mean, apart from last game week, Foden was starting every game since game week 3. Was that purely for resting him last game week? What was the reasons that he wasn't in the side?
Yeah, just purely like a bit of squad rotation, a bit of player management, one eye on that Dortmund game, keeping players fresh. It's difficult. Conversations will be going on, and these will be player led. And of course, Phil Foden will want to be a part of every single game, as most players will want to do. But these decisions are never made in isolation. You have the sports science department, you have the medical department, you have the coaches, and they'll also be discussing, about players who are potentially, playing a lot of minutes, putting themselves at risks. And, so it's that risk and reward. It's that fine balance about putting your best team out on the pitch that's available at this, at a particular moment, again, with those upcoming fixtures in mind.
Jandre has said Pep made comments of Foden being injured. Is there anything in that?
Not to my knowledge, in terms of, look, we always need to clarify or quantify issues around what constitutes an injury. Different managers, coaches talk about players being injured. Mikel Arteta spoke about his squad carrying a lot of injuries. But there are no injuries where players, inherently, when you're talking about any club, any player that's 2, 3, 4 months in, are those players 100% fit? The majority, I would say, are not. They're carrying problems, they're carrying niggles, they're managing issues. You get through. Are they injured? No. Are they carrying injuries? Yes. So Phil Foden, I expect, is one of those ones where he's maybe just carrying a little bit of a niggling problem. One of those, again, if it was a Phil Foden in a Fulham team and a Bournemouth team, he's pushed in and he's risked and he starts. With Manchester City, you get rid of a Foden and you're bringing, somebody like Jack Grealish off the bench. You've got a Bernardo Silva, you've got a Riyad Mahrez. You can tweak things. You've got a Gundogan, you can go the 4-2-3-1, you can go to 4-3-3. So that's the difficulty that you have in trying to predict what way, what Pep Guardiola is thinking based on, like I say, on player availability and, players' physical condition.
We've got one last question on Cancelo, Ben. We'll speed it up because I think we'll have to go pretty soon. But Yasinho has, I think, a fairly good question. Do you think Cancelo will be rested before the World Cup? Because of the context of the situation at Manchester City, is they don't really have much backup now in terms of those fullback positions.
Difficult to see Cancelo starting. I mean, he's one of those players that seems to be one of the mainstays of the team, although you can never guarantee. Probably one of those players that you see maybe who more than likely to start, and if Pep's going to look to protect him and manage him, then coming off maybe in and around that 60 to 70 minute mark.
So we turn our attention to the other team in Manchester, the Reds. What is the kind of situation now? I see Ronaldo's not in there, probably because he's played midweek, but also maybe not in the manager's good books. But apart from that, any other big changes to the 11?
Yeah, not really. I thought they were, to be honest, I'm not a big fan of United, but I thought they were great against Chelsea last weekend. Maybe a little unfortunate to come away with just a draw, given that first half performance that forced Potter into that change. With regards to their squad, Anthony Martial remains on the sidelines. Eric Ten Hag remains hopeful that he will return and play before that World Cup break. Elsewhere, it's pretty much as you were. We know Varane has that hamstring injury. Harry Maguire returned in Europe, not 100%. That's why we have Lindelof alongside Martinez.
Well, that's a good little neat summary there of the Red Devils. Newcastle, this is one team that I'm really excited to see. Almiron, Wilson, the whole team are looking good. But once again, no Alan Sam-Maxim. And I think once he's back, the team is going to be scary good, even though they have been pretty damn good already. What's the kind of hold up there? And is there any other team news that people need to be aware of?
Yeah, Sam-Maxim's on the cusp of a return. I was actually up the training ground this week and he looks fine. He looks in good nick. That's an irritation in the hamstring. Again, not an injury as such, but given he's had a couple of setbacks, just being protected by Eddie Howe. I'm expecting him to be in the match day squad this weekend, but certainly not ready to start. And also after going to Tottenham and getting that great result in North London again, I don't see too many changes in that starting 11. But, that bench for Newcastle is looking really strong and things are looking good for the future for us.
Yeah, you guys attack, defence, just all over the pitch. You're ridiculously good at the moment. Definitely top 4, maybe top 3. So good. We got Yasinho asking, Trippier's not going to get rested, is he?
Absolutely not, in my opinion. There have been a couple of issues with regards to maybe a couple of knocks, a little bit of fatigue-related problems, cramp. We've had Javier Manquillo, who could come in on the right-hand side. He's been injured for a while, so he isn't even really in a position to come in and start yet. And like I say, I don't see Eddie Howe tinkering too much, with his starting 11. Newcastle now are playing, week to week. So there's plenty of recovery time. The sessions in between those matches, will be at a lower intensity, given the fact that we've had quite a congested period. So I think Kieran Trippier is absolutely locked in, 100%.
I think as well, Trippier is so important to the Eddie Howe style, his delivery, but also Eddie Howe is the marginal gains manager. He loves set pieces, and Trippier is a master at them, and that's why Newcastle have been one of the best teams in the league this season from dead ball situations. Nottingham Forest, they seem to be on the end of a lot of these dead ball situations. But what is their injury news? Anything important? I think the main ones that people are concerned about are Aurier and Williams.
Yeah, look, we haven't heard from Steve Cooper as it currently stands. That'll be very, very soon. I'm going with an unchanged lineup. Of course, they got the 3 points in the early kickoff against Liverpool. So how could I not stick with the same 11? Lewis O'Brien has been back on the training pitches following a nasty bug and illness that kept him out of contention for a few games. But like I say, I'm fully expecting Forest to go unchanged. And as far as I'm aware, Aurier and Nico Williams are absolutely fine.
Southampton, another team that I don't think there's too much interest in, but any important injury updates?
The return of 18-year-old midfielder Romeo Lavia back on the training pitches, had a full session with the group for the first time on Thursday. Ralph Hasenhüttl said that he would love him to be a part of the squad, although he hadn't been cleared by the medical department. So he's one that will be in and around that match day squad. And like I say, he will be pushing for a first team start in the very near future.
So Spurs, one of the bigger teams in the Premier League at the moment, but they've been on really bad form for a while. Their attack is really lacking a lot of creativity, and they had another disappointing result midweek. Is there going to be a bit of chopping and changing to kind of counter that, Ben?
Yeah, possibly. We've just heard from Antonio Conte actually while we've been on this live stream. So again, updates to come with that. Potentially, we do know that Richarlison, he's still out with a calf problem, and Kulusevski, that hamstring issue, it continues to hamper him. So he's not in contention either. That limits what Antonio Conte can actually do with this team at the moment. Will we see changes on the flanks with Sessegnon, Matt Doherty, Spence even, or even with that backline with Ben Davies, Davinson Sanchez, they're all options. So like I say, if you do revisit this article, there could be 1 or 2 changes in there.
Do you want to try Kulusevski again? We've really worked on this behind the scenes.
Kulusevski.
There you go. No, there was never a problem, just like Ivan earlier.
Ivan Astupia.
Yes. We've got John Dre Bottas has asked, never know who to get. Doherty, Perisic, Emerson, Sessegnon. I think the thing that we always say, Ben, and you say this often in the 888 article that you put out as well, is that you get Dyer just because he starts, and Tottenham are pretty good on set pieces. Perisic, Emerson, all of them, the wing backs for Conte this season haven't really ripped up any trees. You know, they haven't looked like the usual Conte fullbacks, and the team have been pretty conservative in attack, and so you're looking basically for clean sheet points. Well, get Dyer. There's no risk of rotation there. Would you? I mean, that's kind of what you say all the time, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. His ceiling may not be as high as some of those flying fullbacks, but in terms of game time and insurances of starts, you get that with, Eric Dyer when he's fit. So I prefer to, err on the side of caution with that one, and I'll always go with him.
Moving it to the Hammers, and again, is it a bit hard to kind of predict them at the moment? You know, the Scamacca versus Antonio, will they play 2 up front? Will they play 1? Is this one of the harder teams to predict?
Antonio, again, you talk about, he's not exactly ripping up trees, and, his opportunities have been limited in the main to those European games. And, I suppose he isn't giving David Moyes much of a decision to make there in terms of forcing his way back in there. So that's why I've got Scamacca leading that line. The big question mark, it would be over Jared Bowen. That could potentially throw things up a little bit. He missed out against Silkeborg in the Conference League because of an ankle problem, but he has, I would say, not trained fully with the squad on Friday morning, but he is running outside. And of course, they don't play until Sunday, so they do have one more session with regards to that. Other talking points could be around Ben Johnson starting at right back or Soufal. Ben Johnson was one of only 2 players to retain their place in that starting 11 on Thursday night, the other being side Ben Rama. Defensively, there'll be a lot of talk about Naif Agard. We covered it in pre-season. David Moyes loves him. He says he's a stylish centre-back, but while he played in Europe, he doesn't think he's ready yet to start in the Premier League.
Well, this is the thing as well, with a lot of these signings, especially because he's been injured, is that kind of getting used to the physicality of the Premier League. It's one thing in Europe, it's one thing in the Premier League, and because he had that, I'm not sure what injury it was, but it was fairly bad that he's been out for a while. You got to usher these people back in safely. We've got a few questions on Bowen. Is he all right, Ben?
Like I say, one more session to come on Saturday. Positive news with regards to the fact that he has been outside running on the grass this morning. So not involved fully. So therefore, we're not really able to give any kind of definitive answer. But what we do know is it isn't too serious. So positive signs for this moment. That's why I've got him in the team. Although, again, we're not likely to have any further insight until past the FPL deadline on Saturday.
With the situation of Foden as well, is he more likely to be risked just because he's so important to the team?
Look, I think David Moyes has been very sensible in terms of his squad management this season. And yes, Jared Bowen is one of those high status players, but there is a little bit of rotation within there and possibility and flexibility, particularly as you touched upon the Mikel Antonio. You could bring Fornals in there. Lanzini is another option. I don't think he'll necessarily want to take any unnecessary risk, but this is an ankle problem. It's not a soft tissue or a muscular injury that you could potentially, risk, and which would put Jared Bowen out for several weeks. This is more of an impact problem. Again, not too serious. The fact that he is running outside, like I say, all lends itself to him probably being okay for this weekend.
We've also got a question: any rotation risk or resting of Cresswell?
Um, Certainly not. Yeah, he wasn't involved from the start against Silkeborg, so we've seen Emerson come into that starting 11. If David Moyes had any concerns, like I say, I'm not aware of those. The fact he's only playing one Premier League game a week now, he's had a full, he'll have a full week to recover, from or 6 days, is it, from the win over Bournemouth. As long as you're getting 72 hours, that's really optimum levels for recovery in terms of turnaround. He's had that and a lot more. So again, I think Cresswell will be absolutely fine.
Final team update is Wolves, and then we've got maybe a couple of questions to discuss. But yeah, Yesenia has asked any news on Sarr. Yeah, what's the Wolves situation?
Diego Costa, a slight injury doubt. I've had concerns about Diego Costa starting anyway in recent weeks. I do have him in this 11, but I think Chan could quite possibly come in. Diego Costa did train on Friday, but Wolves, I think if I'm right, have only scored 5 times this season. Steve Davis needs to address that, and they need to start scoring goals. Otherwise, they have a mountain to climb every week. And of course, they're coming off the back of that 4-0 home defeat by Leicester. So there may be some chopping and changes within that team. We haven't got Johnny in this starting 11 as it stands. He could potentially come in at left back, or he could go at right back ahead of Semedo. I do see that Kilman and Collins are locked in. Guedes is another player this summer signing who's potentially, you could drop there in there as well. So I'm going to have a little bit of tinker from that. We heard from interim boss Steve Davis around just after 1 o'clock. So again, by the time we jumped on the live stream, we haven't had much to look at in terms of what he said and offer me thoughts forward for that.
There's a lot of questions about your Salah triple captain pick, Ben. We've got...
It's all in support, isn't it? Cheers,
yes.
Guys. I know you really love it.
John Dre says, Ben, please explain the Salah triple captain. Do you know something that we don't? Hashtag Haaland not starting. FPL Popo says, Ben, can I do a -4 Mitrovic to Nunez for those assist points since you're triple captaining Salah? Yeah, just there's quite a lot of interest in this pick. I put in the comments, but I think this will be a nice topic to end on. You're the differential king, Ben. The alliteration is there, but it's true. You're differential Dinnery. You love it. You're Mr. Low ownership, and you do get quite a few assets. That's how you like to play FPL rather than going with the meta.
Absolutely, Jay. For those that don't know, so I've limited myself or restricted myself to 3 what are classed as over-owned players. So that's 3 players with 10% ownership or more. Salah is included in one of those. Therefore, I don't own Erling Haaland. It was a decision that I made maybe 5-6 weeks ago when his ownership went up to around about 75-76%. I actually transferred him straight out for Callum Wilson when he returned from injury. So that was the rationale behind that. My current template rating is 5% according to live FPL. So I'm only at 5% of the template, and I love that. So that to me is the challenge in terms of trying to accrue points and finish as high as I possibly can. So the Salah captaincy therefore becomes a little bit of a no-brainer because I don't have those concerns over Haaland. The fact it's maybe a triple captaincy, and it is just a maybe at this point, comes purely from the fact that they're playing Leeds United and that porous backline and, the failings of Meslier this season. Does he sit 19th, Jay, for XG prevented? I think that's right. So I do expect Liverpool to maybe hit the lily whites for 3 and possibly 4. And hopefully, Salah will be filling his boots with at least a couple of goals there.
Well, there you go, everybody. You've got the insight into the beautiful mind of Ben, just elite thinking and planning there. But that's how he plays the game, a bit of fun. I'm still not sure what I'm doing with my team, but this is why I leave my transfers, I leave my decisions late, because the injury news comes in thick and fast, especially at this time of the week. So We're going to love you. We're going to leave you. We're going to wish you the best of luck this weekend with your FPL teams. But for now, that is the end from us. And we will be back again, same time next week, as always, to answer your questions.